Okay, so this tutorial is about painting with watercolors. So you'll need your standard watercolor tray. I like the ones that have black and every color of the rainbow. Sometimes they come with a brown, which is fine. You really don't need any more than this. Sometimes they make big packs that have twice as many or even 3 times as many colors, and that's fine if you want to invest in one of those. But these really simple packs are enough, and I'll show you that you can mix colors with these as well. Now, in order to activate your watercolors, you do need to add water to the little paint cakes that are in here. And these are called paint cakes. It's not the kind of cake you eat. It'd be pretty yucky if you ate these, but that's what they are called. Now, one thing that's very important about painting with watercolors is that you want to make sure that you keep each of your paint cakes the same color as it's supposed to be. So what that means is you are going to want to rinse your paintbrush out in between each color that you use so that you're not going from one paint to another and getting some of another color into one of the paint cakes, because that will ruin it and it's hard to fix. Okay, so a lot of these paintbrush set or watercolor sets come with a paintbrush, which is great. You can paint with anything you're comfortable with. I like to use paintbrushes that have a smaller tip when I'm doing watercolor, and I like to hold it in the middle of the handle. This way I have a lot of control when I move my fingers, and I can also move my wrist. You also need a water cup. Now with a water cup, and I'll show you in a different view at some point, that when you put your paintbrush to rest in your water, you want to make sure that the water is not going to go above this metal part of the paintbrush. So you want to keep it about in the middle of this metal piece. So you don't want to put a lot of water in your water cup. So if it does go above the metal piece and the water is sitting above this line here, what can happen is it will actually make your paintbrush bristles fall out over time, and it will ruin the brush. So it's best to not put too much water in your paint cup. And by the way, my paint cup is an old laundry detergent cup, but you can use whatever you're comfortable with. Okay, so I have my paper here, and sometimes what I like to do is I like to make a light sketch with a pencil of what I am going to draw. You don't always have to do this, but you can if it will help you. But very, very light sketch with your pencil, and you may not even be able to see that because I drew so light. And that's on purpose. I want to make it so that I can erase my lines later if I want to. And then now that our paint is nice and wet and has had a chance to sit, I can just take my paintbrush and go straight into one of the paints, and I kind of swirl my brush around in the paint to get it on my paintbrush, and then go straight to the paper. Now see how I am holding my paintbrush right in the middle of the handle, and I'm painting small, careful brush strokes, controlling that brush so that I get all of my shape that I drew filled in. And in between colors I rinse. Sometimes I like to have a little piece of paper towel to kind of tap off excess water if I want to. Now if I want to mix a color together, say I want to transition from this yellow to this orange color, you can do that while the paint is still wet and just kind of very carefully mix them together on the paper. And then I'll wash my paintbrush off, kind of dry it off a little bit on my paper towel, and then I'll just kind of make a few little motions with my paintbrush here in between where those two colors touch to kind of help blend them together with a clean brush. So that's your first technique if you're going to blend colors. Your second technique, which is kind of cool, is if you take your paintbrush with just clean water and you do just clean water on your paper, and then you take little bits of a color and dab them onto the paper, you can see that it actually starts kind of spreading out, and it will fill in all those areas that you had painted in with just clean water. So that technique is called a wet on wet technique. It means you get the paper wet first, then you take wet paint and kind of dab it in. And you can even do something fun like take a second color, kind of put a few little dots of a second color in there, and it'll blend together a little bit, which is fun. Okay. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is if you want to, say, make a rainbow, what you can do is you can take red and paint it in. And then instead of going straight to orange, I'm going to rinse my brush out and go straight to yellow and paint slightly over my red paint on the paper. And you can see that that has sort of twisted around. It's a little bit shiny there, but you can see that it's mixing together to create orange. And then if I do the same thing with blue, just slightly over the yellow, it kind of mixes together on its own a little bit there and makes the green in between. So that's a fun technique to kind of just put colors right next to each other. Now, watercolors do something called bleed. They bleed together, meaning if the paint is wet and you put other wet paint next to it, those colors will kind of try to spread into each other a little bit. So if you don't want something like this to happen, it's very important that you let whatever color you have completely dry before you move on to another color. So for instance, if I say I want to make an outline on my shape, if I take black and I start painting around this first shape that I made, you may think, well, it's been sitting there a while, so it's probably dry enough. Well, not always, okay? You're gonna see that the black will start spreading out into the paint that I put on there. And it doesn't happen right away. Sometimes it takes a while and you'll come back to your painting and it'll be a big mess because you're putting your black on too early, okay? And you don't always have to outline. I'm just giving this as an example of these two colors kind of blending together. So what you do want to do is if you want your color to have a nice crisp edge in between it and the next color next to it, you have to paint it and then you have to let it sit and you have to let it dry out completely before you come back and do anything next to it. Now that can take a long time. Sometimes it's longer than the art class. Sometimes it's half an hour or an hour. Some things that you can do is you can go take your painting and set it out in the sun outside, and it will kind of help to dry it out a little bit quicker. And you can, take a blow dryer to it or something, but it's best to just kind of let it sit. Now, while we're waiting for some things to dry, I want to show you another technique, which is kind of fun. If you have normal table salt in your house, just in your grinder or in a shaker or whatever, if you take just a little tiny pinch and you put it on your painting while it is still wet, this is very important. Your painting has to still be slightly wet or very wet for this to work. Something really, really cool happens, and I will show you that after this has a chance to dry. So we are going to take a break and let this dry, and I'll come back and show you the dry paint with another color next to it, as well as what the salt has done. Okay, so here we are about 20 minutes later, and it's not totally dry, but you can see that my salt has done its job. Just carefully get that off my paper. And you can see here that what it does is it makes some kind of fun little crystal formations on top of your paint. And depending on how wet your paint is when you put the salt down and how long you leave it on there, that's what's going to make the biggest difference. Okay, so see how I had some paint bleed here? Okay, and actually I didn't have very much happen up here, which was lucky, and that's because I painted that first and I kind of had a thin layer on there. But now that my paint is all dry to the touch, I can just show you that when I am ready to then go back in and paint something right next to or on top of something that I've already painted, I'm not going to get that paint bleed, okay? So what I am gonna get though is some color mixing. So if I do go back and put another color over something else, it will change the look of that color. So you can see that that changed from blue to sort of a green color, those mixing together. Okay, last I wanted to show you that once again, you do not have to have any special big packs of watercolors, because what you can do is you can actually mix these, but as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, you don't want to mix them in the actual paint cups, because that will make it a permanent change and that will ruin colors. So if you do want to mix some other colors, what you actually want to do is use the lid of the tray over here. And some of them have these nice little areas that are sectioned off. Some of them are just one big piece, but you have plenty of room to mix. So what I can do is I can just take a little bit of paint that I intend to mix together with something else. Say I want to have a lighter color green. Then I'll just take some yellow and some green and mix them together over here in the lid. And now I have a nice lime green color. Okay. So what you can do is just experiment with, mixing all these colors together. If you want to make a color lighter, you don't need white, because all you need to do is just add more water. So if I want a very light color of, say, purple, I take a lot of water and just a little touch of purple, and I've made a nice light purple. Okay, so experiment with these things, and don't get frustrated if it doesn't go the right way the first time, because practice makes perfect. And again, you just want to remember that you want to let things dry so you don't get that paint bleed effect if you don't want it. Okay, I hope that helps. Have fun.